With help from Megan Casella, Sabrina Rodriguez and Adam Basudi, Nafta officials part ways. On cautiously optimistic note, trade officials from Canada, Mexico and the United States headed out of Mexico City on Tuesday, offering hints that they may actually be able to reach a deal if their counterparts begin to show some flexibility on contentious issues. Story continued below. The road forward for NAFTA 2.0 remains stacked with challenges, including a continued standoff on hot-button topics and a near-impossible deadline of late March. But with the political spotlight turned away from them, negotiators made progress over the past week on a handful of chapters and began to take small steps toward compromise on others, sending an optimistic signal that the trade agreement is no longer on the brink of collapse. The harshest review of the fifth round of talks came from U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, who, along with his Mexican and Canadian counterparts, did not travel to the Camino Real hotel for negotiations. While we have made progress on some of our efforts to modernize NAFTA, I remain concerned about the lack of headway, Lighthizer said late Tuesday in a statement after the round closed. Thus far, we have seen no evidence that Canada or Mexico are willing to seriously engage on provisions that will lead to a rebalanced agreement. Lighthizer challenged his counterparts to fully engage and make significant progress during the technical intersessional taking place in December in Washington, where ministers will once again not be in attendance. The hope is that the more informal December talks will present another much-needed opportunity for negotiators to hash out issues before a high-stakes and politically fraught Round 6 kicks off in Montreal in late January. I think there's a good argument that we are on schedule, that meeting our deadline of an agreement by March is not out of the question at this point, a senior U.S. official told reporters at the close of talks. Read the full wrap-up here. It's Wednesday, November 22nd. Welcome to Morning Trade, where I'm thankful I have to think of a greeting only about 10 times a year. How do Adam and Megan do it day in and day out? They must be geniuses. I know that's right. Got in any trade news or wisdom to pass my way? Let me know. dpalmer@politico.com or at Trade Reporter. Programming note: Morning Trade will not publish from November 23rd, November 26th. Our next Morning Trade newsletter will publish on November 27th. Please continue to follow pro-trade issues here. Mark your calendar. Politico is partnering with women-owned businesses in the DC metro area to offer a full week of exclusive perks in conjunction with the 5th Annual Women Rule Summit. Join the fun at participating businesses during Women Rule Week, November 27th to December the 1st, for exclusive deals, and tweet 5x using Women Rule for a chance to win 2 free tickets to the summit on December 5th. Listen to the latest Women Rule podcast featuring Glamour editor-in-chief Cindy live here. U.S. official: Mexico get points for review proposal despite Lighthizer's grumbling about the other country's lack of engagement. A senior U.S. official said Mexico deserves credit for offering a counter-proposal to the U.S. plan for a sunset review mechanism that could terminate the agreement after 5 years. I think it's useful and necessary that you have that give and take. So full marks to Mexico for thinking about what a review mechanism could be and looking at it from their perspective, the official told reporters. The United States wants the review to be as serious, as focused as possible, which is why it has put forward its approach, he said. But Mexico gets points for engaging, he added. Still, USTR's latest batch of negotiating objectives does not specifically mention a 5-year sunset review, and USTR General Counsel Stephen Vaughn avoided the term at a Senate Finance Trade Subcommittee field hearing on Monday in San Antonio. The latest language reflects a U.S. willingness to engage on the issue, the senior U.S. official briefing reporters in Mexico City said. When you start digging into the U.S. proposal, there's not much behind it, a source close to the talks said, adding it's not Mexico's or Canada's job to flesh out U.S. proposals for them. However, Canada and Mexico are open to working together with the U.S. to build out a review mechanism, the source said. No currency text yet. The U.S. official also told reporters that all major text had been proposed in the talks, but then corrected himself when asked about a currency provision. There is not currency text on the table. We continue to work with our brethren at the Treasury Department, he said. U.S. makes no mention of major Mexican labor push. The U.S. official said the administration will hew closely to what Congress has mandated on labor provisions in fast-track legislation, but remains circumspect about whether the administration might go above and beyond to address wage and labor standards in Mexico that many critics view as the driving force for U.S. jobs moving south of the border. Certainly, the labor reform in Mexico is an important part of improving the environment and the structures here in Mexico, the official said. I wouldn't say that's our plan or that exhausts the tools that we have for the range of our dialogue. Mexico is in the midst of implementing a constitutional amendment that is aimed at making labor conciliation and arbitration boards more independent and giving workers more control over labor contracts. On Tuesday, Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto announced Mexico will raise its minimum wage from about $4 to $4.71 a day, a 10% increase, but one unlikely to appease workers' rights groups. Critics say labor contracts are often drawn up between companies and corporate-controlled labor unions without worker input. Organized labor and Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. have warned that a rebooted Nafta will not get their support unless it comprehensively addresses what they argue to be a wage-suppressing labor system. U.S. dismisses Mexicoo's procurement proposal. Access to the government procurement market in Nafta countries is shaping up to be one of the most contentious issues as talks continue, even as negotiators make significant progress on broad swathes of the chapter. Both Canada and Mexico have rejected the U.S.'s text, but only Mexico has put forward a counteroffer. But the senior U.S. official told reporters Tuesday that Mexico's proposal was something that was not going to advance the ball very much in and of itself. Mexico and Canada have both criticized the U.S. demand for reciprocal access to government procurement markets. A major problem with the U.S.'s proposal is that it equates fairness with the size of the economy, a faulty measurement when looking at Mexico or Canada in comparison to the U.S., one source familiar with the talks said. In an effort to point out the damaging effects the U.S. proposal, if adopted, would have, Mexico reportedly countered with an offer that sought to limit the value of procurement contracts awarded to U.S. companies in Mexico to the same amount that Mexican firms get in the U.S. American firms are awarded more procurement contracts in both Canada and Mexico than either is awarded in the U.S., so the proposal would be most damaging to U.S. businesses. The U.S. official commended Mexico for engaging on the issue and said the U.S. would consider it, but was largely dismissive of the idea. Mexico is trying to be helpful in using a counterproposal as a way to crystallize their views, both of what they think is necessary for them and their understanding of what the impact of the U.S. approach would have on them, the official said. That said, I don't think their proposal is going to advance the ball very much in and of itself. But again, it's part of a process of dialogue. It's good that we have that sort of engagement. Freeland defends Canada's FACTBASED stance in talks up north. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland defended Canada's negotiating stance in the face of U.S. complaints that it is not offering any counterproposals. Canada always negotiates in good faith, but there are some proposals that we simply cannot agree to, such as the U.S. plan to dramatically revamp the auto rules of origin, Freeland said. We really feel that a fact-based approach is the way to get a good result, Freeland said. One of the things that we try to do in this round is flesh out those proposals and say, it seems to us that if this were to happen the net result would be negative for both of our countries. And then ask the U.S. side, do you agree with our facts, or do you disagree with our facts? In Mexico City, a senior U.S. official bristled at the suggestion that the Trump administration had not done its homework on how its proposed changes to NAFTA auto rules would affect North American auto production and jobs. We have looked at how those rules are structured, how they've operated, how the content and makeup of autos has changed over the years since the NAFTA first went into effect, and what flexibility or options we have to change those rules going forward. So I think we've done the analysis we need to do to make a rule of origin proposal that takes all of that into account, the official said. Whirlpool looks to Trump after ITC recommendations. It's been a long road for Whirlpool in its quest for import protection against South Korean rivals Samsung and LG, and a set of recommendations from the U.S. International Trade Commission on Tuesday didn't provide as much protection as it wanted. So now it all comes down to President Donald Trump. Whirlpool remains optimistic that the administration will implement a full and appropriate remedy to ensure that Samsung and LG cannot circumvent any element of the order, the company said in a statement after the ITC vote, which stopped significantly short of Whirlpool's request for a flat 50% tariff on imports. Instead, all four commissioners recommended Trump establish a 1.2 million unit tariff quota, with an initial tariff of 50% on imports above that level, declining to 45% and 40% in years 2 and 3. In addition, two commissioners recommended no tariffs on washes within the 1.2 million quota, and two others recommended an initial 20% in quota duty, dropping to 18% and 15% in years 2 and 3. For more detail, click here to read Adam Basudi's story. Samsung speaks. The South Korean manufacturing giant urged Trump not to impose any remedy, but said the ITC appropriately rejected Whirlpool's outrageous tariff proposal, which would have had a devastating impact on consumers, retailers and jobs. We continue to believe that no remedy is necessary since our South Carolina factory will begin producing washing machines in early 2018, the company said in a statement. We've already hired 350 people who are preparing our factory for production in January, and we are on track to fill another 150 manufacturing jobs in South Carolina by the end of the year. Freshman House Democrats unveil Nafta demands. A group of 22 freshman House Democrats have gone on record saying they cannot vote for a Nafta agreement unless it drops the controversial investor-state dispute settlement, putting them on a collision course with business groups that favor keeping the provision. That was one of several recommendations in a letter to Lighthizer released Tuesday. To read more, click here. New North Korean sanctions hit Chinese firms. New U.S. sanctions aimed at cutting off funding for North Korea's nuclear and missile programs hit 4 Chinese trading companies and a Chinese individual, which the Treasury Department said have collectively exported more than $678 million worth of goods to isolated nation in recent years. Tuesday's action came a day after the Trump administration redesignated North Korea a state sponsor of terrorism, adding the Hermit state to a list that includes Iran, Sudan and Syria. The Treasury Department also put 6 North Korean shipping and trade companies and 20 vessels on its sanctions list, which bars Americans from doing business with them. As North Korea continues to threaten international peace and security, we are steadfast in our determination to maximize economic pressure to isolate it from outside sources of trade and revenue while exposing its evasive tactics, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said in a statement. Gao-Kissel Amendment did little to boost government textile purchases. A review of the Kissel Amendment, passed by Congress in 2009 to help the hard-hit textile industry, found it has done relatively little to boost the Department of Homeland Security's purchases of uniforms and other textiles made by U.S. manufacturers, the Government Accountability Office said in a report released on Tuesday. One big reason the amendment still requires DHS procurements to be made in accordance with U.S. trade agreements. That means most DHS officers must treat certain textiles made in 128 countries the same as domestic products. As a result, 58% of funds spent to order uniforms under the current DHS contract are for imported items, the report found. USTR visitor logs show corporate lobbying representatives from Google, Amazon, Ford, Walmart and other big U.S. companies all dropped by the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative during the early months of the administration, according to visitor logs released on Tuesday by ProPublica. The logs, which document the period from January the 23rd to July 15th, with big gaps toward the end, contain a large number of redactions. But they do show the big role that Vaughn played as acting U.S. Trade Representative while waiting for Lighthizer to be confirmed. Meanwhile, White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro appears in the logs several times early on, but his name disappears after April 5. Iraq knocking at WTO's door. Again, Iraq has resumed its bid to join the World Trade Organization, after 9 years of inactivity while it continued to grapple with the turbulent aftermath of the 2003 U.S.-led invasion. The country, with a population of over 35 million, is one of the biggest economies still outside the WTO. We are here to assure you that Iraq is fully committed to the process of economic reform and to be part of the global economic system, Adel Al-Masoudi, Director General of the Foreign Economic Relations Department in Iraq's Ministry of Trade, told WTO members in Geneva. We look forward to opening new horizons for cooperation with the WTO. Iraq knows the accession process will take years, but is determined to become an integral part of the international economic and trading system, added Ambassador Muaid Saleh, the country's permanent representative in Geneva. To read more, click here. Trade remedy corner. Spanish olives hit. The U.S. Commerce Department announced Tuesday it would hit imports of Spanish ripe olives with preliminary tariffs of more than 7% to offset trade distorting subsidies alleged by a coalition of U.S. olive growers. The U.S. values its relationships with Spain, but even friendly countries must play by the rules, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said in a statement. Commerce is also considering whether the olive imports should be subject to much steeper anti-dumping duties to address allegations that Spanish producers are selling below their costs of production. The California growers, Bill Carter Foods Inc. and Musco Family Olive Co., argue that commerce should slap anti-dumping duties of between 78% and 223% on the Spanish imports. Imports of ripe olives from Spain in 2016 were valued at an estimated $70.9 million, Commerce said in a fact sheet. Boom lowered on steel wire rod in a separate case involving carbon and alloy steel wire rod. The Commerce Department set final anti-dumping duties of 84% on imports from the United Arab Emirates, 280% on imports from Belarus and 437% to 757% on imports from Russia, the biggest of the three suppliers in 2016. The ITC is expected to make a final injury determination in the case by January 5. International overnight. Freelance says Canada prepared for the worst amid squabbles over Nafta, CBC News reports. Nafta round closes with talks bogged down by conflict. New York Times reports. Trump's hopes for quick Nafta deal are dimming. Bloomberg reports. Nafta talks hit wall as Mexico, Canada push back on U.S. demands. Reuters reports. Trudeau replaces Trump as biggest obstacle to Pacific Trade Pact. Bloomberg reports. That's all for Morning Trade. See you again soon. In the meantime, drop the team a line. Abasoudi at Politico.com and at Abasoudi Macasella at Politico.com and at Marcella D. Palmer at Politico.com and at Trade Reporter Joinger at Politico.com and at Joinger and P. Joshi at Politico.com and at Pio Shiny. Also follow us at Politico Pro and at Morning Trade.